So now that we've covered the introduction to deployment, let's go over actual deployment planning. Now, with deployment planning, we don't have this sort of model that we can create that we can in a whole lot of other areas. And this is basically due to the fact that planning and the idea of deployment is very, very focused on exactly the problem at hand. What I mean by this is, let's say that we're talking about Amazon and we want to add a new feature or something new to Amazon. Now, if we add something like a backend change or new products or a new feature to Amazon, it's going to be a different deployment process than if we added it to Walmart.com or if we added it to eBay or any other online retailer. And this is because each one is built differently. Therefore, there is no one size fits all plan for these. And because of that, like I said, we don't have models here. All we have are these questions that we need to ask ourselves while we come up with the deployment plan to actually create a deployment plan that we can then implement. So don't expect like any models or anything in this particular part. Just kind of come up with these ideas and these questions that we can ask. So the first thing we need to understand is the amount of planning is dependent on the size of the change. And this is referencing in the overview, the scope of the change is very important. If we're making a very tiny text change, let's say one of the products on Amazon is slightly misspelled, we don't need to go through a giant process. All we have to do is basically make a quick database update and we have now deployed our change. It's nothing large, it's just a very, very small change. Now, if we're adding new products, we've gone up another level, so we've changed the text, but now we're actually creating entire new products. Again, these are very independent. It's not talking about the architecture of Amazon. It's not talking about the back-end servers or the financial data. All we're doing is adding a couple of products. There are a couple of things that can go wrong here. We don't want to offer things that we don't have. We don't want to infringe on copyrights or anything. So a little more planning goes into this. If we're opening up an entire new section, so let's say we're opening up like a new section called toys, where we're actually implementing a ton of new products and maybe even new features. So instead of just one product, we have multiple products all maybe tied into their own little categories. Now we start having this thing where architecture comes into play. How do we place them? What are these new features we're implementing? Things can start to go wrong in this section. And maybe after this, we're not just upgrading, a section, we're upgrading the entire back end. So we're upgrading the entire way Amazon processes, or any online retailer processes, their information. So now we have these clusters of basically all of this data here that we're touching. So I'm trying to make like little boxes here. So, we have like this box is here and this box is here, and it's very, very detailed, and it goes on and on and on. So we're updating the entire backend here. We're going to need a ton of planning for this. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and we're getting to this point where critical things can go wrong, where a failure here, a failure at this point would actually make it so we stop doing business. We start losing tons and tons of money. And then so on until we, are updating the entire website. So whenever we're creating these changes, we have to keep in mind that scope is very, very important. And we look at areas which will most likely have the biggest problems. And some of the areas to look at are over here. This is not a comprehensive list, meaning there are more areas that we might want to look at, but these are just some ideas of things that might change. So we're looking for where the biggest problems might occur. And again, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time if we're making, even if in this giant update we're doing a couple of text changes, we probably don't need to make a rollback or a way to turn back on those areas. What we do need to look at is stuff like this. For example, database activities. Maybe we're changing the way the database works. If we're changing the way the database works, there's a potential that when it switches over, the database could become corrupt. Maybe power turns off for half a second while it's updating the database. Now we have an unfinished sideways sort of database that isn't going to work for either version. Maybe there's a typo in it and the old version doesn't work with this new version, and now we have this big sort of data mishmash problem, and requests are constantly coming in, so we need to understand what to do with the database. Third-party software integration. We're changing our program, but we can't tell others, the other third parties. That means that it's not us, it's someone else's software we're using. We can't tell them to change with us. So if we make a change, we have to make sure that we're still integrated properly. Otherwise, that change could break all of the third-party software, and suddenly, for example, if we're working with Amazon again, maybe the eBay or maybe the PayPal payment system doesn't work anymore, and that's a big problem there. Then we have runtime changes. So for example, during runtime, maybe things have changed. So we've gotten the code to work, but when we actually deploy it and run it, maybe something changed that we didn't anticipate. And that's important to understand, know how to turn back from. Training on both the user and the business side. The website used to work a certain way. The program used to work a certain way, and now it's changed. So we need training. We need training both on the user side. Maybe we need to create a tutorial to help people get through it so we don't lose business. And we need training on the business side. Maybe the servers are different. Maybe the back end is different. We need to make sure our business, our employees are trained to keep up with these changes. Downtime. How are we going to handle the downtime? Are we going to, for example, keep the front end up and just have orders maybe like stacking? If it's again, like we're talking about an online retailer, are we just going to have them put into a queue and wait until the servers are restored? Or are we going to just shut down the whole website and not let anyone through? And what are the financial implications of all of this? Backups, network, memory, these are things that might change. Maybe the backups are going to go into a different location. Maybe the new website is too big and our backups aren't going to work anymore because we need to have larger storage, which kind of goes in with memory. Maybe we're introducing a new API call, which is a call to the server. And maybe with that call to the server, we start having networking problems. We didn't anticipate that it's going to go from maybe like 1 gigabyte per second to, I don't know, maybe 10 terabytes per second. Maybe we made a really large change and maybe our cables, our hardware itself can't even handle that. And we have to implement a new server farm or something like that. So all of these things are ideas and areas that we need to look at. And we need to plan these steps, and we need to plan how to turn back on these steps. How do we go backwards? What's a way that we can reinstate the good? The old website works perfectly fine. What we're trying to do is we're trying to enhance it, maybe fix a couple of bugs, but right now it's making us money. We don't want to burn the whole business to the ground. So we need to make sure that we're going forward at increments, and then if anything goes wrong, jumping all the way back and reworking the way that we do this. So that's deployment planning. There's some questions to ask and sort of have to work out to get this to be a successful deployment.